Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I'm going to be doing a video that I have seen a number of booktubers do. This is going through every year you have been alive to see if you have read a book that's published that year and to see if you like that book. And I decided, that's a really interesting challenge. Now, I saw this on Vic's Goddess of Gore, Ollie at Criminale, and Troy Trade Up. Now, Vix and Ollie both did a split screen with their Goodreads page. I'm not a member of Goodreads, so I can't do that. Troy Trade Up just read his list of books and showed you a little picture screen up next to your head. And that's what I'm going to do. And so what I did is I did an internet search for every year. Best books of 1964 all the way down through 2023 and see what books come up. Sometimes it was a Goodreads list. And I have to say that Goodreads often gets its years wrong. They're not perfect. So what I did is I made a list of all the books, or a book listed for every year I've been alive. And then I started downloading cover images and verifying what year that book has been published. My verification was Wikipedia. And I know someone's going to come up and comment and say, Wikipedia is crowdsourced and may not be entirely reliable. Yes, that is true. But I think it's a little more reliable than Goodreads. But the end effect is that when I list a book published in a year in this list, I may have gotten a few wrong. That is just the nature of the internet. I cannot go grab a physical copy of every book because I don't own a physical copy of every book to verify what year they were published in. But that's how I did it. So I was born in 1964. And I have a list of all my books here. So you will see me reading from a list because there's no possible way I could memorize this list. So here we go. 1964, Sometimes a Great Notion by Ken Kesey. He is more famously known for his novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But this is a story of a family in Oregon who own a logging company. It is sort of experimentally written. There are changes of narrative within paragraphs. So top of the paragraph, one character is narrating. End of the paragraph, another character is narrating. I think this is an absolutely fascinating and wonderful book. Unfortunately, Ken Kesey sort of got into LSD after he published this book, and his other books weren't as good. 1965, The Magus by John Fowles. This is of a young Englishman shortly after World War II who goes to a Greek island and meets a mysterious man who teaches him about the God game. And there is, of course, a beautiful woman involved. There are two versions of this book, an earlier version, and then later on, a few years later, he revised the book. He calls it a stylistic revision rather than major plot points, but still a fascinating philosophical novel. 1966, The Blue World by Jack Vance. This is a science fiction novel. I'm including this on this list because it is the first adult book that I ever read when I was in 6th grade. It is a story of a distant planet that is mostly a sea world, and it is inhabited by sea monsters, and a man is out to kill the king of the sea monsters. 1967, The Third Policeman by Flann O'Brien. This is a darkly comic, absurd, philosophical novel. The theory is that all crimes can be traced back to a bicycle. It was originally written in the 30s and 40s, but not published until 1967. 1968, True Grit by Charles Portis. This is a Western of a 14-year-old girl out to seek revenge for the death of her father. Absolutely marvelous book. I especially loved the audiobook narrated by Donna Tartt. 1969, SlaughterhouseFive by Kurt Vonnegut. This is, of course, Kurt Vonnegut's most famous novel. It is the story of Billy Pilgrim, who gets unstuck in time. Absolutely fascinating. 1970, Nine Princes in Ember by Roger Zelazny. When I was in high school, I devoured this early series. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. It starts with a man with amnesia, but he discovers that he can walk through different worlds. Excellent science fantasy. 1971, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. This is often regarded as nonfiction. Some people say it's more fiction than nonfiction. I'm not going to get into that argument, but it is about the narrator's drug-induced weekend in Las Vegas. 1972, The Eiger Sanction by Travanian. A wealthy college professor, an art collector, is also secretly an assassin, and he is sentenced to assassinate someone while climbing the Eiger Mountain. 1973, Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. Set during World War II, the American Tyrone Slothrop has erections, and his erections can determine when the German V rockets will fall in London. It also features an octopus. Difficult book, but utterly fascinating. 1974, Killer Angels by Michael Shara. This is an historical novel about the Battle of Gettysburg. And it is one of the best, maybe the best, Civil War novels ever written. I've read it twice, and I need to read it again. 1975, J.R. by William Gaddis. This is a winner of the National Book Award. It is the story of a young boy who sort of finagles his way into becoming a paper millionaire, but he's actually in debt for millions. Absolutely hilarious. 1976, A Feast of Snakes by Harry Cruz. An alcoholic ex-athlete goes on a rattlesnake roundup in Georgia. Harry Cruz is an author people should experience at least once in their life. 1977, Lord Fowl's Bane by Stephen R. Donaldson. This is the beginning of fantasy trilogy of a modern man, an author, who is transported into a distant fantasy land. Except in the real world, he has leprosy and is completely shunned. And in this world, he is believed to be the reincarnation of one of its greatest heroes. And he is very reluctant to be a hero. He is also one of the most repulsively disgusting characters you will read, but he does have a redemption arc. 1978, The Sea by Iris Murdoch. Iris Murdoch was a philosophy professor who also wrote novels. This is the story of a retired theater man who goes to the sea and buys a dilapidated mansion. And he has a lot of hijinks in that mansion. There also, maybe, perhaps, a sea monster involved. 1979, The Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer. This is a nonfiction novel. How much of it's fiction, how much of it nonfiction, that again is open to debate. I think it is mostly nonfiction, but I'm not going to guarantee that. And it is the story of Gary Gilmore, who was the first American executed after the Supreme Court, or was it the Supreme Court? After executions became legal in the United States again. Really good novel, really good nonfiction, but really long, like over 1,000 pages. 1980, A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Perhaps my favorite novel of all time, about the blowhard, the amazingly disgusting and repulsive and utterly hilarious Ignatius Reilly and his hijinks in New Orleans as he tries to work out with some jobs. 1981, Valis by Philip K. Dick. This is sort of a science fiction novel. It is a science fiction novel, but it's also a novel about the author dealing with his identity and drug use. It is probably my favorite Philip K. Dick novel. 1982, Path to Power by Robert A. Caro. This is the first of so far published 4 books on Lyndon Baines Johnson. Robert A. Caro is just a magnificent biographer. He will go into the weeds with detail, unlike any other author. It is utterly fascinating, and you will be amazed and repulsed by LBJ. He was a bastard, but he was an amazing bastard. 1983, Pet Cemetery by Stephen King. I'm not a huge Stephen King fan anymore, but this was my favorite of his novels. It is his one truly gruesome horror novel with an absolutely perfect ending. The only thing I don't like is the spelling of cemetery. He spells it with an S, and it just messes things up. And that's the only criticism I can give for that book. 1984, Money by Martin Amos. This is a modern British novel. It's something you need to experience. He has a way of writing and dragging you into the scenes that is just fantastic. And there is a scene where the character, who is not Martin Amos, and his friend, who is not Christopher Hitchens, go visit a hand job parlor. You'll have to experience that yourself. 1985, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Easily his best novel. One of the best novels set in the American West. It is extremely, extremely violent. And you will get to meet the judge. And the judge is a character who is sort of the embodiment of war and evil in humanity. And experience the judge for yourself. 1986, Mouse, My Father Bleeds History by Art Spiegelman. This is a graphic novel about Art Spiegelman talking to his father, who was an inmate in Auschwitz. So you have 2 storylines. You have the modern, where Art is talking to his father, and then the father's tale of what it was like to be in Poland before the Jews are rounded up into Auschwitz. The best graphic novel that I know of. And it is the first half of a duology. 1987, Consider Philibus by Ian M. Banks. Ian Banks was a contemporary British novelist of modern literature, and he decided he wanted to write a science fiction novel. So he put his middle initial M in there to distinguish his books, his literary books from his science fiction books. And this is his first foray into science fiction. And it introduces readers to the culture, the far distant reign of humanity and computers and starships that think for themselves. And it is one of my favorite science fiction series. His science fiction series do not normally contain continuous characters, so you can read them in any order. But I still started with Consider Philippus, so I'm going to tell everyone to start there. 1988, Coco by Peter Straub. Peter Straub is sort of the Stephen King's counterpoint in American horror. I think he's a little bit of a finer author, a little more nuanced, but this is more of a thriller. This is about a serial killer in Vietnam. And after the soldiers get back from Vietnam, the main characters think that Coco is back to killing again. Perfect thriller. 1989, A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. This is a story of a boy who killed his mother with a foul ball. And he has a very peculiar voice, and he forms a friendship that will last his life. And it is just an amazing story. It is also an anti-war story. Kind of. Really good. 1990, Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley. This is a book set in the 50s, historical mystery novel set in the 50s by an African-American detective. Now, this is the only one in the series that I have read, and I really need to read more because it was really good. 1991, The Choring of the Trees by Donald Harrington. Donald Harrington is an amazing author. He does not get any love on BookTube or anywhere else that I can see. He was an art professor teaching out of Little Rock, Arkansas. He was not a native of Arkansas, but he fell in love with the Ozarks, and all of his stories are set in the Arkansas Ozarks. Now, he wrote in the pre-Clinton era, so his Arkansas is not necessarily Arkansas of today. And a lot of that was set in history. This one I can't remember is, I believe, the 30s, maybe 40s. And it's a story of a man in prison sentenced to be executed who thinks he can hear the trees talking through him, choring through his prison window. An amazing author. 1992, Fathers and Crows by William T. Vollmann. Vollmann is my favorite living American author. He writes mega maximist novels. This is an historical novel about the Jesuits and the Iroquois meeting in Canada and just the disastrous results that occur when those two cultures clash. And this is a 900-page book, but I completely was fascinated by it. 1993, Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. She was an African-American science fiction novelist back in the days when there were very few. This is not really my favorite book by her. I think I prefer Dawn, but still, if you want a science fiction novel, it's a pretty good way to go. 1994, The Alienist by Caleb Carr. This is an historical mystery novel set in New York in the 1890s about an alienist, which is essentially a psychologist trying to track down a serial killer by uses of psychology. It also features Teddy Roosevelt when he was the commissioner of police in New York City. He was a minor character. 1995, American Tabloid by James Ellroy. This is the beginning of a trilogy, his Underworld trilogy, that involves corrupt police officers and criminals, and J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI. 1996, The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark by Carl Sagan. This is a science book. It talks about rational thinking. It should be required reading for every high school or college student in this country. And I'm dead serious about that. 1997, Into Thin Air, a personal account of the Mount Everest disaster by John Krakauer. Krakauer was a journalist for Outside magazine, and he was sent to do a story about people climbing Mount Everest who aren't professional mountain climbers. Now, Krakauer was sort of on his road to being a professional mountain climber until he went into journalism. And he says, I'll do the story, but I'm going to climb the mountain too. And there was a disaster on the top of Mount Everest where a number of people lost their lives. It is one of the best, most gripping works of nonfiction that you will read, and you will ask yourself, why in the hell would anyone want to climb a mountain? He does explain that, sort of, but still, why in the hell would anyone want to climb a mountain? 1998, A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. Bill Bryson was an American who spent a number of years living in England, and when he returned to the United States, he wanted to get back in touch with his American roots, and he decided to walk the Appalachian Trail with his friend Cats. Just experience Cats for yourself. 1999, Kryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson. Stephenson is a science fiction author, but Kryptonomicon is more of an historical novel with some contemporary scenes mixed in. It is the story of Alan Turing and how he built how he built a computer to crack Enigma. It also features programming in the Unix language, which as a computer programmer, I found fascinating, but maybe some readers will be a little put off by those scenes, but otherwise, an excellent novel. 2000, The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. This is one of Margaret Atwood's best novels. It features a writer who is writing a science fiction novel, and you get pieces of that science fiction novel within the novel, but it's also about the family dynamics surrounding this author. Fun stuff. 2001, The Other Bolin Girl by Philippa Gregory. This is an historical novel about Anne Boleyn. It is sometimes listed as a romance, but it really is not a romance. It is an historical novel. I originally read it for a book group, and I almost didn't read it because I thought it was going to be a romance. But I read it anyway. I found it fascinating. The other man in the group, who was about 10 years older than me at the time, also found it fascinating, in part because he thought it was going to be a romance and didn't want to read it, and was just fascinated with the history. 2002, Snow by Orhan Pamuk. He is the Turkish winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature, or a Turkish winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. I honestly don't remember a whole lot about this plot, but I remember when I read it, I really enjoyed it a lot. And I went out and bought a couple other books by the author and never got around to reading them. 2003, The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Eric Lawson. This is a work of nonfiction about the American Fair. And at the time, there was a serial killer in Chicago. So there's a juxtaposition of how you work on the World Fair, not American, World Fairs, and the serial killer. Great stuff. 2004, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark. I am not normally a fantasy reader, but this is not a normal fantasy. This is sort of like reading historical work with fantasy mixed in, as an alternate history of England if magic existed. And I really liked it. 2005, The River of Doubt by Candice Millard. This is one of my all-time favorite works of nonfiction. It describes President, or should I say ex-President Theodore Roosevelt after he lost his re-election bid under the Bull Moose Party. He was feeling rather depressed. And how did he want to cure his depression? He wanted to explore an uncharted river, a tributary of the Amazon. And that trip almost cost him his life and the life of his son, Kermit. I cannot recommend The River of Doubt highly enough. 2006, Blindside by Peter Watts. This is a hard science fiction novel about humans going out into space to investigate what could be the first alien contact. And how can you communicate with an alien who in no way resembles humanity and does not have a human language? And the captain of this starship is a vampire. 2007, The Terror by Dan Simmons. This is an historical horror novel. There really was a ship called the Terror that went out to seek the Northern Passage. And that's when you go north in summertime and think you can sail around the world. But the ship got stuck in the ice. And while they're waiting for the ice to thaw, they discover that there is something living on the ice. A really amazing novel. Historically and as a horror novel, it works both ways. 2008, The 10-Cent Plague, The Great Comic Book Scare and How It Changed America by David Hajdu. There was a time in the 50s when people thought comic books were going to destroy the minds of little boys with horror and superheroes. And it is the story of how that came about and how people wanted to make sure that comics were more wholesome for little boys to read, and inventing the Comics Code. Now, I am not really a comic reader. I don't read the comics, but this was a great piece of history. 2009, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is an historical novel about the life of Thomas Cromwell. Hilary Mantel turned this into a trilogy. I have read the first two books of the trilogy, but not the last one. And it is an alternative look at this historical figure, Thomas Cromwell. 2010, Faithful Place by Tana French. She, again, is one of my favorite living authors. She lives in Ireland. It is the story. She writes a series called The Murder Squad, but it's not really a series. It is all individual books. And it is the story of the chief of the undercover division in Dublin, who discovers that his girlfriend, who disappeared 17 years ago, who was assumed to have run off to England, was murdered. And it is a story of him sort of interfering with that murder investigation. And it is a perfect little murder mystery. And I like it because all the characters are real. You don't get these super cops or super villains. These are real people and real police officers, and just utterly fascinating. 2011, The Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes. This is Barnes' 11th novel. It is the story of a man recounting his youth after a friend of his youth has died, and the interesting relationships that he had when he was a younger man. 2012, The Orphan Master Son by Adam Johnson. This is a novel set in North Korea. You do not want to live in North Korea. Trust me. If this author gets anything close to being right, you really do not want to live in North Korea. One of the most powerful scenes was of a father talking to a son, or may have been a daughter. And the father says, if the officials ever ask you to denounce me, denounce me. Because if you do not denounce me, I will die and you will die. But if you denounce me, maybe you will survive. 2013, Night Film by Marisha Passell. This is the story of a man investigating the disappearance of a very famous movie director who directed some very sordid, strange movies. And as he investigates his life, he discovers that his life was sordid. The director's life was sordid and strange. And he gets more and more involved with these lives. 2014, A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. This is a historical novel about Bob Marley and the people who tried to kill him. 2015, The Sympathizer by Viet Thuong Nguyen. This is the story of a man in Vietnam who becomes an agent against America. And again, set during the Vietnam War era. It is the first of a trilogy, as I now learned. There is a second book currently published, and the third is still being written. 2016, Moonglow by Michael Chabon. This is Chabon's fictionalization of the life of his grandfather in World War II. And his father had some quite interesting adventures during World War II. 2017, 4321 by Paul Astor. A young Jewish boy is growing up in New York. His father owns a warehouse. And one day, his uncle decides to burn down the warehouse for insurance money. And then it takes a turn. There are 4 parallel stories. In one story, the uncle did not get to burn down his brother's business. In the second, he does burn it down, but his father knows his brother did it and does not turn him into the police, and therefore does not get insurance money. In the third, he does turn in his brother for insurance money. And the fourth, the father dies in the fire, trying to prevent the fire. And it takes that one event and gives you 4 lives of the same main character. Unfortunately, the main character does not live to the end through all 4 iterations. Now, this is not a science fiction novel, but it's fascinating. 2018, The Library Book. This is by Susan Orlean. This is the story of a Los Angeles public library that caught on fire. And it is just a love affair to public libraries. And the man who set the library on fire tells his story as well. 2019, The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is an historical novel about a young African-American man who gets picked up hitchhiking by a man driving a stolen car and gets sent down to a work camp as a prisoner, and is the story of his life in that prison camp as a young man. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and it has a wonderful twist ending. 2020, Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is a fictionalized account of the life of William Shakespeare's son, Hamlet. Now, Hamlet is an alternate spelling of Hamlet. Is spelled, the novel is spelled with an N, where Hamlet is spelled with an L. And it is mostly about his family, his son and his mother. It probably is not historically accurate to what his real family was like, but it is a wonderful portrait of grief, because Hamlet catches the plague and dies. And it is that death of his son, according to the author, that inspires Shakespeare to write his play, Hamlet. 2021, The Lincoln Highway by Amos Tolles. This is an historical novel set in the United States, and it is the story of two brothers on a road trip together, sort of looking for their mother who disappeared. But it's also just the exploration of America and the road, and a wonderful little story. 2022, Sandy Hook, An American Tragedy and the Battle for Truth by Elizabeth Williamson. This is the story of the Sandy Hook Massacre and the people, Alex Jones, who said it was a hoax, and why people believe in hoaxes and follow people like Alex Jones. Best nonfiction that I've read in a long time. 2023, I have a confession here. I've only read one book published in 2023, so this is the default winner. Fortunately, it's a book that I actually like too. Monstrilio by Geraldo Samano Cordova. And this is the story of a mother who loses her son to a disease. So she cuts out his lung and incubates it until it turns into another kind of creature that sort of resembles her son and sort of doesn't. And that is every book I have read, or a book that I've read for every year that I have been alive. And all the books that I have mentioned are good enough to give a recommendation to. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.